The tension was already building long before this game even started. There had been physical moments, controversy, social media reactions, and plenty of conversation surrounding the matchup. By the time Indiana and Chicago stepped onto the court, fans knew this wasn't going to feel like an ordinary game. But when the final buzzer sounded, all of that pre-game drama had been replaced by one major storyline. Caitlin Clark took over. Clark delivered one of the biggest performances of her career, finishing with 37 points, 10 assists, and a career-high 8 three-pointers. On the other side, D'Jonai Carrington finished with 7 points on 3-for-11 shooting. And those numbers told a major part of the story, because this matchup had been surrounded by so much anticipation. Earlier in the season, a physical incident involving Sophie Cunningham and Carrington had created controversy and added another layer to the rivalry between the two teams. The rematch quickly became one of the most talked-about games on the schedule. Fans were waiting to see what would happen. Would the game become physical again? Would the tension spill over onto the court? Would all the talk before the matchup turn into an unforgettable showdown? But Indiana had a simple answer. Focus on basketball. And Caitlin Clark did exactly that. From the beginning of the game, Chicago made it clear that Clark wasn't going to get an easy night. The defense pressured her. They challenged her. They tried to disrupt her rhythm. But none of it worked. Clark stayed calm and kept playing her game. And then the shots started falling. One three-pointer. Then another. Then another. Pull-up threes in transition. Shots coming off screens. Deep jumpers. Step-backs with defenders closing in. Chicago kept trying to find an answer, but Clark continued finding ways to score. And what made the performance even more impressive was that she wasn't just hunting points. She was running the entire fence. Clark finished with 10 assists, creating opportunities for her teammates while still putting enormous pressure on Chicago's defense. Every time defenders focused too heavily on stopping her, someone else became available. That is what makes her so dangerous. You can't simply guard Caitlin Clark with one defender and expect the problem to disappear. If you give her space, she can shoot. If you pressure her too aggressively, she can create for a teammate. And if the entire defense collapses around her, Indiana has other players ready to take advantage. This game showed exactly that. Kelsey Mitchell was outstanding, finishing with 30 points and continuing her incredible scoring run. Lexi Hull added 14 points on efficient shooting. Other players stepped up and contributed important minutes. And with Aliyah Boston unavailable, Indiana had to make adjustments. Instead of slowing down, the Fever continued playing with pace, confidence, and energy. They moved the ball. They attacked the basket. And most importantly, they kept knocking down shots. As the game continued, it became clear that Indiana was building something Chicago was struggling to stop. But for much of the night, the game remained competitive. Chicago stayed within reach. The Fever had control, but they hadn't completely put the game away. Then came the fourth quarter, and everything changed. Indiana exploded offensively. The Fever outscored Chicago 30-13 in the final period. That was the moment the game turned from competitive to dominant. Clark continued making big plays. Mitchell kept attacking. Indiana's supporting cast continued making shots and winning possessions. And Chicago simply couldn't keep up. By the end of the night, Indiana had secured a convincing 23-point victory. For all the anticipation surrounding this matchup, the final result was surprisingly clear. The Fever had been the better team, and Caitlin Clark had been the best player on the floor. Her final stat line was incredible. 37 points, 10 assists, 8 three-pointers. It was the type of performance that changes the conversation around a player. And Clark has been having more and more of those performances. This wasn't just a player getting hot for one night. She controlled the game from start to finish. Chicago threw different defensive looks at her. They tried pressure. They tried physicality. They challenged her outside shots. But Clark continued finding answers. And one of the most impressive things about her performance was her composure. In a game filled with history and emotion, she didn't allow herself to become distracted. She focused on the next possession. Make a play. Get back on defense. Find the open teammate. Take the shot when it's there. Then do it all again. That approach helped Indiana take complete control of the game. Meanwhile, as the pressure increased, Chicago began struggling to find offensive consistency. Missed shots started becoming more frequent. The Fever's defense became more aggressive. And Indiana began taking advantage of every opportunity. Once they gained momentum, they never gave it back. The Fever were especially dangerous from beyond the three-point line. Indiana finished the game with 18 made threes, setting a franchise record, and Clark was responsible for 8 of them. Think about that for a moment. 8 three-pointers from one player in a single game. Every time she found space, there was danger. Even when defenders were close, she found ways to make difficult shots. Her shooting range forces defenses to play differently. Defenders can't relax. They can't casually go under screens. They can't give her even a small amount of space, because Clark can turn that small opening into 3 points almost instantly. And when those shots start falling, the entire game changes. That's exactly what happened against Chicago. Every big three seemed to create more momentum for Indiana. The crowd reacted. The Fever gained confidence. And Chicago faced even more pressure on the next possession. By the final minutes, there wasn't much doubt about the outcome. The only real question was how big Clark's final numbers would become. Could she reach 40 points? Would she hit another 3? Would she add another historic achievement to the night? She eventually finished with 37 points and 10 assists, more than enough to make this one of the standout performances of the season. And there was another important part of the story. Clark didn't do it alone. Kelsey Mitchell's 30 points gave Indiana another unstoppable scoring option. When Chicago tried focusing heavily on Clark, Mitchell was ready to attack. That combination can be extremely difficult to defend. Clark creates pressure from deep. Mitchell attacks from different areas of the floor. And when both players are scoring, Indiana becomes a completely different team. Lexi Hull also provided an important contribution with 14 points. The Fever supporting players made open shots and capitalized on opportunities. That balanced attack was one of the biggest reasons Indiana pulled away. This wasn't a one-player victory. Clark was a star of the night, but the entire team contributed, and that should be encouraging for the Fever moving forward. Because teams become dangerous when they have multiple ways to win. If Clark is scoring 37, that's obviously a major advantage. But if Mitchell is also scoring 30, defenses have an even bigger problem. Add efficient shooting from the role players, and suddenly there aren't enough defenders to stop everyone. That's what Indiana showed in this game. They have options. They have depth, and when their offense is clicking, they can overwhelm opponents quickly. The fourth quarter was a perfect example. Chicago entered the final period with a chance to stay competitive, but Indiana completely shut the door. 30 points in one quarter. Only 13 for Chicago. That kind of difference doesn't happen by accident. It happens when one team executes and the other team begins running out of answers. Indiana moved the ball. They made the extra pass. They hit open shots. They played with confidence. And Chicago couldn't stop the momentum. The final 23-point margin reflected just how dominant Indiana became down the stretch. And for Caitlin Clark, the performance added another major chapter to an already impressive career. Her combination of scoring and playmaking continues to separate her from most players. A 30-point game is impressive. A double-double is impressive. Hitting 8 three-pointers is impressive. But combining all of that in the same game? That's something special. Clark wasn't simply filling up the stat sheet. She was controlling the entire game. Every possession seemed to run through her. Every defensive adjustment was designed with her in mind. And despite all of that attention, she still produced. That's what elite players do. They know the defense is coming. They know opponents are preparing specifically for them. And they still find a way. Chicago knew Caitlin Clark was going to be the center of Indiana's offense. They had time to prepare. They had a defensive game plan. But stopping her turned out to be a completely different challenge. And Clark made sure everyone noticed. There was plenty of discussion before the game. There was plenty of anticipation. But after the game, the conversation was about what happened on the court. And what happened was simple. Caitlin Clark delivered. Indiana dominated the fourth quarter. Kelsey Mitchell added 30 points. The Fever hit a franchise record 18 three-pointers. And Chicago was left trying to figure out what went wrong. The aftermath of the game created even more discussion as reactions began appearing online. Questions about officiating, physical play, and the emotional nature of the matchup became part of the conversation. But when fans looked back at the game, the scoreboard remained impossible to ignore. Indiana won by 23. Clark scored 37. Mitchell scored 30. and the Fever's three-point shooting completely changed the game. Sometimes basketball can become surrounded by so much outside noise that people forget the most important thing. Eventually, the game has to be played, and once the players step onto the court, the scoreboard becomes a final answer. For Indiana, this was a statement victory, not because of what was said before the game, not because of the controversy, but because of the way they played. They stayed focused, they executed, and when the opportunity arrived to take control, they did. Caitlin Clark was at the center of everything. 8 threes, 37 points, 10 assists. It was a performance built for the spotlight. And the bigger the moment became, the more comfortable Clark looked. That confidence is one of the reasons she has become such a major attraction in women's basketball. Fans know that when she steps onto the court, something memorable can happen. A deep three, a difficult pass, a scoring explosion, a record-breaking performance. Against Chicago, they got all of it. The game began with anticipation and drama, but it ended with a basketball statement. Clark let her game do the talking, and by the final buzzer, there wasn't much left to debate. Indiana had won, Clark had dominated, and the Fever had shown once again how dangerous they can be when their offense is clicking. Now, the bigger question is what comes next. Can Caitlin Clark continue producing at this level? Can Kelsey Mitchell maintain her incredible scoring run? Can Indiana's supporting players continue stepping up? And can the Fever carry this momentum into the next stage of the season? If this game was any indication, Indiana is becoming a team that nobody should want to face. They have elite shooting, they have multiple scorers, they have playmaking, and they are learning how to close games. Most importantly, they have Caitlin Clark, and when Clark is playing at this level, anything is possible. This matchup may have started with drama, controversy, and huge expectations, but in the end, one performance stood above everything else. Caitlin Clark, 37 points, 10 assists, 8 three-pointers, a franchise record 18-3 for Indiana, and a 23-point victory. The noise before the game was loud, but the performance afterward was even louder. What do you think? Was this one of Caitlin Clark's best performances? Can the Indiana Fever continue this momentum? And how dangerous could this team become if Clark, Mitchell, and the rest of the roster continue playing at this level? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more basketball news, highlights, and stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.